Well, first I want to say thank you to my colleague and your professor, Greg Broberg, for hosting us this afternoon. We're really pleased to be here with you in this class in particular because you're learning about what justice studies is, and our Seeking Justice in Arizona series. We hit the 13th year now, I believe. This was developed in order to help students understand the world beyond the campus and see that the concepts, the ideas, case studies that you are exploring in your classes are alive out there. And so we bring speakers in here to talk to you about what they're doing and what kind of pathway to justice they've forged and why. I'm Madeline Edelman, professor here in Justice Studies in the School of Social Transformation, and it really is my pleasure to be able to host this series, and especially today, we have really great guests with us. Come on in. Many of us have not been in your building before. This is a new classroom for many of us, so welcome. I wanted to introduce our two speakers, but before I do, I want to ask each person here just to raise your hand if you have gone to elementary school. Just raise your hand. Anyone? Middle school? Just keep your hand up. High school? Okay. Anyone here know anyone who's in middle or high school or elementary school right now? Probably, yeah. So I think you're going to find the comments today quite relevant because we're talking about school, K-12 schools, and how the state of Arizona funds our education here. The K-12 system is the pipeline, right? You all are here. Actually, who here went to Arizona schools, K-12, or at least part of it? Arizona schools. Okay. So you all are the result, if you will, of our K-12 system. So we're going to be talking this afternoon about how we actually support and what we envision for education here in the state of Arizona. And the two very special people that help us think through those ideas are, to my left, my far left, Sharon Kirsch, who I'm going to read the bio that she provided with me, that I don't want to miss any of these details. Sharon began her career in higher education programs at the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington, D.C., and later served as Communications and Community Outreach Director for a national healthcare management company. She's an associate professor of English and rhetorical studies at ASU with more than 20 years of experience at public universities. She teaches and publishes on women's literature, poetics, and public discourse. She's the mother of 2 school-age children and believes that the people of Arizona, not out-of-state interests, should make decisions about public education in our state. Welcome, Sharon. Our second guest, part of the team here, is Dawn Penich-Thacker. Dawn began her career as a U.S. Army Public Affairs officer, serving in strategic communications at the Pentagon and elsewhere. She holds a PhD in rhetoric and linguistics, with which she teaches and publishes on political rhetoric and professional communication. And she has volunteered on local, state, and national campaigns since 2006. So over a decade of experience that Dawn brings to us this afternoon. Sharon is the Save Our Schools Arizona Director of Research and Training. And Dawn is the Save Our Schools Arizona Director of Communications. I know that they are interested in voting, and so I put some dates on the board here for you all to read at your leisure. October 9th is an important date. Not only because it's my birthday, so try to remember that, but also because it's a registration deadline for you, if you're eligible, to register to vote here in the state of Arizona. And the other dates there are when early voting starts, October 10th, the next day. Early ballot request deadline, meaning you have to finish requesting your early ballot that you can vote by mail on October 26th. And then November 6th, please put that in your calendars. November 6th is the day you actually vote if you're going to do it in person, right? There's all different kinds of ways of voting. You can go to Service Arizona, Google Service Arizona, and find out how to register to vote. But I know that's pretty relevant to the work that you all are doing here. Last thing, I hope by the end of the talk this afternoon, you'll know why I'm wearing a red shirt today. Okay? I'll leave it for you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, and we will try to keep this brisk and interesting for you, and I know that there will be room at the end for discussion or questions or just anything that we want to share with one another. So let's get started. The title of what we've prepared today is Equity, Misinformation, and the Fight for Arizona's Public Schools. And I think you'll find once you hear all of this information that we're not exaggerating when we call it a fight for the very existence of our public school system here in Arizona and also nationally. So the Arizona State Constitution, which was written in 1910, is actually unique. Not all state constitutions across the country have a statement about public education, but ours does. So our founding fathers saw fit to say that public education and the access to free and equal and high quality publication was so important that they actually wrote it into the Constitution. And so as we watch kind of this systematic degradation and attack on our public education system, we can very much look at it as an attack on our actual founding values and principles, something that over 100 years ago, the people who started this great state knew was going to be essential to future success, to prosperity. So just a few disturbing statistics about our great state of Arizona. A recent study just from earlier this year called us the 51st worst state for teachers. So that should give you some pause, because how can we be the 51st? And the answer to that is that they're actually including the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., as a state. And so of all of the states, we have what is considered the worst environment for teachers in the K-12 system, so our kindergarten through senior year teachers. One of the reasons that that is the case is that we are also 49th out of 51 in per student spending. And what that means is that, the state has one big budget, just like any household or individual has a budget, and they carve out this much money to keep the roads intact, this much money to have, police departments and social services, this much money for students who are going through the public schools. And in the entire nation, we spend almost the least amount of money educating our students going through public schools. And when, how sometimes when you look at stats, it's like an athlete's scores, right? Like the difference between first place and third place could be milliseconds. Well, that is not the case when it comes to education funding and how far down 49 is from even 25th, or let alone first, second place in terms of how much we fund the school for each student that's in there. We are several $1,000s less. We are less than half of many states in the country for how much we pay for a student to go through their education in K through 12. Class sizes, I don't know if you guys can think back. Some of you, it was a while ago. Some of it was probably just last year, and you think about your class sizes. How many of you were in classes, even in high school, of 40 and above? Very common, right? It's common to us. I like to say that all of these statistics tell us that we are frogs in the pot. Have you ever heard that expression of like, if you put a frog in a pot and then turn it up to boiling, the temperature rises gradually, right? And the frog doesn't even realize that it's boiling to death until it has happened, because it's so gradual that you don't even notice. And that, I think, I also went through Arizona public schools, and then, as you heard, my bio moved away and everything else. I think that's what the case is for us. We all look back, right, and we think, like, I don't know, I feel like I got a good education. I've got really good teachers, and like I'm a successful human being, I think. And all of that is true, but it's kind of like, figuring out how to feed a family of 10 with one box of mac and cheese. Somehow we figured it out, but no one would say that's the ideal. And certainly we can't say that we're doing justice to the families and students who are moving through these schools with that kind of situation. So many of you probably remember from just a few months ago the Red for Ed phenomenon, right? cars with paint all over them, teacher walkout that lasted 6 days, tons of press coverage, national news, international news, and the governor, in response to that pressure from teachers, parents, community leaders, business leaders, said he's putting $100 million into the public schools and promising a 20% raise. Now, budgets don't quite work like that. You can promise something, but every year the money has to actually be there. So many schools got anywhere between, many teachers got anywhere between a 6% raise and maybe a 12% raise in some cases, so it varied. But even after all of that, even after the raise, even after the additional funding, we remain 47th in the nation. So if you think back to what I said, when we say we're at the bottom of the barrel, we're not barely at the bottom of the barrel. We are way down there, like you need a flashlight to see where we are down there. How many of you know, you may not know, but how many of you know that you had a substitute teacher or someone who wasn't trained as a teacher throughout your K-12 experience? All the time, right? This is a completely true statement, there are students in Arizona who have never, in 12 years of public education, had a trained teacher or permanent teacher at the head of their classroom. Not one grade. Their teachers were long-term subs or someone who was not trained in teaching but took the job on what's called like an emergency certificate. And they are certainly lovely people, but would any of us go to an emergency room and be like, I don't care if you're a trained doctor, I just want a nice person to come here and work on me? We would not accept that in most industries. You wouldn't even want that for your car or for all kinds of other services. And yet this is absolutely the reality, and again, back to that frog in the pot syndrome. We don't even realize that this is the case because it's been going on so long that we stopped talking about it years ago as a society.
So I'm going to jump in here and just add a couple of other things. If you look at these numbers, and these numbers just came out last week. And so the top number is almost 25% of teaching positions just remain vacant. Almost 50% are teachers who don't have certification. So that means I had to double check this. I just couldn't believe that this was right. Almost 73% of K through 12 teachers are either long-term subs or don't have a standard teaching certificate. Now, if you attach kids to that, so that's about 3,400 classrooms in Arizona that don't have a certified teacher. So if those classrooms average about 30 kids, that's over 100,000 kids. But even worse are the other 2,000 classrooms that have just a sub. And it's usually a rotating list of subs. Sometimes it's the person who works at the office because that's all they can get on Thursday. Sometimes it's somebody who will come for a week. And those kids literally never know who's going to be at the front of their classroom on any given day. And so I think we look at statistics a lot, but when you think about the lived experience of kids who have to live through this every day or for their entire time in going to public schools in Arizona, it is a really serious crisis that we have. 20% of teachers quit in the first year. 40% of teachers quit in the first 3 years. Any idea why? Say it again. Workload, is that what you said?
I just said it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it. And why wouldn't it be worth it?
They're not getting paid enough.
Yeah, they're not getting paid. Their classes are huge. The people who do have certification tend to have to mentor the teacher in the next room who doesn't have certification. So it's almost like another job they're taking on, trying to help teachers so they don't quit. And then you notice down here, these numbers down here, the people who do leave, the majority of them are actually certified teachers. So it's those certified teachers who are saying, this is crazy, I can't do this, and they leave. So because things are so bad in Arizona, And because of what Save Our Schools did 2 years ago when we referred Senate Bill 1431, which is now Prop 305, to the ballot, and because of the huge uprising last spring of Red for Ed, where depending upon who's cut the numbers, between 50 and 70,000 people went to the Capitol. It was an amazing event. So we get a lot of national coverage in Arizona, and we'll talk a little bit more about why, but I just wanted to throw this in the slideshow because this is from Sunday, just yesterday, 2 days ago. New York Times Magazine did a really extensive profile on education and including a big section on Arizona. And Dawn, our fearless communications person for Save Our Schools, spent a lot of time helping that reporter get in touch with people to help her understand what's happening on the ground and in our classrooms. So I think it's important to know that there was a time in our state's history when people actually valued public education. So in the 60s, we were 19th nationally. And in the 90s, we were kind of in the middle of the pack. And since then, it has just been a downward spiral. So the obvious questions are why? Why are our classrooms being starved? Why does Arizona lag behind so many other states? The cuts to our education budget were greater than any other state. Same with our universities. The university budgets were cut after the economy tanked in 2008 by over 50%. So even though Save Our Schools focuses on K through 12, Don and I also live in the university world, so we understand that it impacts us here as well. And you all know because your tuition keeps going up. And so the other question is why? Why do our state leaders not fund or invest in public education? And so it says here that the answers are hidden. They're really not. It's pretty, once you start looking, it's like a ball of yarn. You just keep pulling, and you find out that almost every answer leads back to national privatization movements. So a national movement to privatize public education. And Arizona, for nearly 30 years, has been a petri dish to test out these different ways to privatize public education. So the people who want to do this call traditional public schools a dead end, a monopoly, and they refer to them as government schools. So if you think back to the slide with our Constitution did not call them government schools. It called them public schools. But the school choice people are starting to change that language in our laws, in media coverage, and they use the term government school in a derogatory way. So they view education as an untapped industry and a lot of low-hanging fruit. And part of the reason for that is if you look at any state's budget, one of the biggest line items in it is education. It's true for Arizona, about 42% of our general fund goes to public education. Sounds like a lot, but then you look at all these statistics and you see that it's not nearly enough and that we are behind every other state in the country. So public school funding has gone down, 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 as school choice has gone up, up, up. And Arizona has some of the most robust school choice options in the entire country, next to Florida, really. And so we see this as a war on our public schools. And what happens is the public schools get defunded, not funded adequately, which forces underperformance. Class sizes get bigger, teachers aren't certified. It was our governor who decided one of the ways to address the teacher shortage crisis was to just remove certification requirements because that would allow more people to teach. Not a great idea. It helps to have actual experience and certification to teach and to be an effective teacher. The other thing that happened is teacher autonomy was removed. And so teachers were just sort of told what to do in the classroom, and they had to kind of follow all these rules and meet all these standards and goals. And then all these alternatives start cropping up, and they get propped up by people who support school choice, who say this is great to have school choice. Parents know what's best for their kids. Schools then, and this is true in Arizona and many other states across the country, get graded on performance. So we have A through F schools in Arizona. You may have been aware of this or not when you were in high school, for those of you who were here. But funding is tied to the grade that that school gets. And so schools that serve low-income communities were especially hard hit because they were often DNF rated schools for a variety of reasons. And so that cycle, defund, force underperformance, take away teacher autonomy, it just happens over and over and over again, year after year after year. So I'm going to throw a bunch of statistics at you. You don't have to remember any of them, but you can just remember this picture. Because really, this picture, in a nutshell, explains what has happened to the schools in Arizona. And this is by David Fitzsimmons, who's an editorial cartoonist for the Tucson Daily Star, and he is fabulous. I had a hard time picking just one. But I wanted to show you this one, because what you see here are two schools, a public school and a private school. And you see the elephant businessmen, right, jackhammering bricks. And they're passing just passing it along, one brick at a time. The effort to defund and divestment public education in Arizona has been systematic, and it has been incremental for nearly 30 years, piece by piece by piece. And so what happens is, I mean, in Arizona, this is literally happening. Some of our buildings are falling apart. They had to close a school a couple of years ago because it structurally wasn't sound and they had to move the kids. So just like the buildings are falling apart, the whole infrastructure of public education, you know, our teacher shortage, all of these things are making our schools very, very vulnerable. It's making a lot of money for some people. So if you've been watching the news lately, we have one of our state legislators is a charter school owner who just stood before the Arizona Charter School Board yesterday asking for permission to sell an entity, his charter schools, to a different entity that would rake in about $12 million for him. That comes primarily from our taxpayer, our public taxpayer dollars. And so it's big, big business. It's big profit. So you have this on your sheet. Did everybody get one of these?
Yes.
And I'll just go over this quickly. Oh, and I put the image on there for you too. So you have that to remember how it is that our schools have become in such a crisis. So the first thing that happened in Arizona in the mid-1990s was open enrollment. And it sounds like a good idea. So the idea is you don't have to go to the district neighborhood school that's just down the street from where you live. You can go to any public school as long as they have a space. So, okay, great. The problem is, what actually happened in practice is if a school was struggling, rather than the community coming together to say, hey, we have to fix this, we have to make this better for our kids, the families who had the means went to different schools, leaving that already struggling school in an even more vulnerable position. So then we also had charter schools start up in Arizona in the mid-1990s. We now have most charter schools of any state in the country. I think we have about 550 of them across Arizona. In Arizona, they are public schools. They're considered public schools. It's a slightly different funding formula, but they're funded similarly to the way our district public schools are funded. Okay, so then it starts to get tricky. So in 1997, suddenly there are tax credits, these things called school tuition organizations, or STO vouchers. And basically it takes public taxpayer dollars and allows a kid to use that for tuition in a private school. In 2006, Arizona tried to implement vouchers. Actually, they did, and it was found unconstitutional in 2009. The same voucher that the ESA voucher, the Empowerment Scholarship Account that Save Our Schools referred to the ballot in November. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the thing to know about vouchers is originally the money would go to the school, but our state constitution says no, we have to have a separation of church and state. It's called the Blaine Amendment. And so it can't go right from the state to a religious school. And so Arizona was the test ground for a workaround that has now been adopted by other states in the United States. And the workaround was, hey, I have this great idea. Let's not give it right to the school. Let's just put it on a debit card and give it to the parent. Because parents know what's best for their kids. And so that's what happens. That's what ESA vouchers are. It's literally a debit card that has anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 on it, depending upon the learning needs of the kid. Kids who have special learning needs get more. And the parents can use it for tuition at private schools. They can use it for educational therapies, including dolphin therapy, which is offered at the new Odyssey Aquarium. That's what they can use their public taxpayer dollars on. Maybe dolphin therapy is great, I don't know. I'm not sure I want my public taxpayer dollars spent on it. And so the same thing happened with vouchers in Arizona. They figured out this workaround of using the debit card, and then little by little, they kept increasing who could use a voucher. So it started just kids with special learning needs who couldn't really be served well in their district school. Okay, that sounds good. Then they expanded it to military families. Then they expanded it to kids in foster families. Then they expanded it to kids on reservations. Then they expanded it to, who am I forgetting?
DNF.
Yeah, DNF schools. Right, little by little by little. And these are the bills that go through our legislature, and they get up and say, hey, it's just a little expansion. But what it is a systematic and incremental divestment of funds from our public schools. And so in 2017, they put a bill through, the Prop, which is now Prop 305, that would have expanded vouchers universally, made them available to all kids. So you don't have to read these numbers. I just want you to get a sense of how this systematic and incremental step-by-step divestment works. And so this is these school tuition organizations, and I did not get this before I started paying attention. So in 1998, individual people could donate. So instead of you paying your taxpayer dollars to the state of Arizona, you can say, you know what, I want my taxpayer dollars to go to a school tuition organization. And so that money never goes into the general fund, and it's the general fund that pays for our schools, it pays for our roads, that kind of thing, right? So it never makes it in there. It goes right to these school tuition organizations. So in the first year, 1.8 million individuals donated 1.8 million to these school tuition organizations. And then look what happens. Corporations suddenly get to make these donations to school tuition organizations. And then, oh, here, let's have another category that corporations can give to. And then, oh, let's add another category of individuals and the way they can give. And so suddenly what happens, here's what I want you to see, it's $1 billion that never makes it into our general fund because it's diverted to these school tuition organizations. And the other thing our legislature did to make sure, right, that this privatization just keeps happening is they tacked on to the bill an automatic 20% increase every year. So no matter what's happening, no matter how old your textbooks are in your high school, doesn't matter, the STO program automatically increases every year.
And just to clarify, these amounts and that $1 billion figure, school tuition, these are only going to private schools.
Yeah.
It's not like people are saying like, oh, okay, part of this is not going into our public schools. This is money that our public schools will never see because it was just funneled into a whole different category. And interestingly, as taxpayers, we can say, well, wait, I want to do this, but I want it to go to my neighborhood school, my public school. We actually can, but it's a fraction of what folks can give to a private school. Now, why would that be? If the idea of giving some of your tax dollars directly to schools and students and learning is a good one, then why is it a tiny fraction for public schools, but a big amount of money for private schools, which are predominantly religious?
93% of those STOs go to religious schools. So I want to give you one example of how people in the state of Arizona profit from running these school tuition organizations. So here's one. It's the second largest school tuition organization in Arizona. It's called the Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization, the ACSTO. Now, when you run one of these school tuition organizations, you get to keep 10% of all the money that comes into you. And then the other 90%, you dole it out in scholarships to kids to go to their mostly religious schools. But you get to keep the 10% for operational costs and administrative costs. And so, for example, the owner of the ACSTO, Steve Yarbrough, pays himself $150,000 a year, pays himself a car allowance. In order to manage all the data, because they're the second largest, they get a lot, they get millions of dollars. In fact, in a 4-year period, they got almost $73 million in donations. And so in order to manage all that, they have to collect a lot of data and keep track of a lot of things. And so the ACSTO decided to outsource that piece of their business to a data management company owned by Yarbrough's wife, She makes about $70,000 a year. I don't know if she gets a car allowance or not. Both of these entities need office space, of course, to work in, so they rent office space. It happens to be in a building they own. This is all legal. And then you see here that he is our just most recent past president of our state senate. Served in the legislature for a long time. This little girl right here is holding a sign that says, and it's on ACSTO paper letterhead, it's fun and I get to learn about Jesus. So it's big, big business. So now ESA vouchers, so STOs are one kind of voucher, ESA, Empowerment Scholarship Accounts, are another kind of voucher. And despite major opposition, that bill that made vouchers universal passed, went through our legislature. And I didn't know Dawn 2 years ago. I ran into her in the Senate Education Committee hearing. I'd never been to the Capitol before. I'd never seen a committee hearing before. I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. Will change the trajectory of your life. But what's significant about this is that it expands it to all kids. So no longer just special categories of kids, but all kids. And it would be a 500% increase, the nation's largest and first universal voucher program. So after the fact, after Save Our Schools started paying attention and getting involved in this process, we found out that in 2016, the American Federation for Children, which is, well, Betsy DeVos, our Secretary of Education, was on the board. It's her company. She stepped down once she became Secretary of Education. But her group, the American Federation for Children, put over $250,000 into our elections in our state of Arizona, so out-of-state money coming into our state legislative races. And if anybody wants all the detail, I can give you all this, but this shows who got what from them. And turns out that this was all to get a legislature that would pass the universal voucher law. They wanted Arizona badly to be the first state to have the universal voucher law. A lot of these school privatization efforts that go through state legislatures, including the vast majority of them in Arizona, come from the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. It's a national organization that drafts legislation, for example, universal vouchers, and then they look around the country and they say, okay, what state could we get this through its state legislature? And Arizona has been the petri dish for the privatization efforts nationally because we tend to have a legislature that will push these things through, even though the vast majority of people who live in this state actually support public schools. So this is Debbie Lesko. Senator Lesko was the sponsor of Senate Bill 1431, and she's there on stage with Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. That was in the summer of 2017. And at that meeting, they laughed at Save Our Schools and said, oh, they're never going to get that on the ballot. That's ridiculous. So after Governor Ducey signed this bill into law, the Secretary of Education personally tweeted him. And at the time, I thought, what? Like, why is the Secretary of Education for the United States of America tweeting our governor? She's tweeting him congratulations, a big win for students and parents tonight with the passage of the, she called them education savings account. That's the ALEC language. In Arizona, we call them empowerment scholarship accounts. I applaud Governor Ducey for putting kids first. So then our local Goldwater Institute, which is a conservative libertarian think tank, sent out an email the next day to all of their supporters. And the email said, 50 years in the making and tonight we closed the deal. Universal education savings accounts. There is a cap at 5,000 new kids per year. We will get it lifted. Thank you for the years of support. Now this we will get it lifted is a big deal. So notice also they're focusing on the fact that this is universal. They very, very much wanted the state of Arizona to be the first state to have universal vouchers. They want all states to have universal vouchers. The only way that bill made it through our legislature is because of an amendment that put a cap on it. So all of the legislators who agreed to vote in favor of that bill, many of them really didn't want to and really didn't support it. Governor twisted their arm, they agreed to it because of the cap. So they really felt like they kind of been played when this came out, and that this was not good faith negotiation on the part of the governor. And the person who wrote this email at Goldwater Institute, I think, lost her job. So where does this come from? Why is this happening in our country? So part of what's happening is, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, a US Supreme Court decision, the justices ruled unanimously that segregating was unconstitutional, couldn't happen. So schools had to be desegregated. 1 year later, Milton Friedman, an economist, wrote a piece called The Role of Government in Education. And in this piece, he says, the ideal way would be to abolish the public school system. How do you do that? Vouchers. And then, this might be too small for you to read, but it says, privately conducted schools can develop exclusively white schools, exclusively colored schools, and mixed schools. He claimed his decision had nothing to do with race. But a few years later, there was a county in Virginia, Prince Edward County in Virginia, that didn't like being told that they had to desegregate their public schools. So that they said, fine, we're just gonna go, we're gonna defund public education, we're just gonna go to a full voucher system in our county. They voted on it, people on the school board agreed, so that's what they did. And they gave all the families in their county a voucher, so that those kids could go to any school they wanted in the county. The problem was, there were no schools in the county where African American kids could go. And for nearly 5 years, African American kids in that county had nowhere to go. Their parents taught them in the churches and things like that. That eventually was also overturned by the the US Supreme Court overturned that decision too. So this is an image from a graphic essay. This is on your handout. On the back side, it's a really interesting graphic essay about race and school privatization. I highly recommend it. But the authors of that say that segregation isn't a design flaw of school choice. It appears built for that purpose. So the question is, whose choice is it? And so one of the things that we say on the other side is it's the school's choice, right? Because if you're going to get a $5,000 voucher and you want to go to a school that costs $10,000, your family has to make up the other $5,000, right? So it turns out that the majority of people who actually use STOs and vouchers tend to be, comparatively speaking, more economically well off, even when the vouchers are intended for lower income people. ESAs and STOs they lack economic and academic accountability. There's way more to say about this. If any of you are interested in it, I'm happy to share some of my sources with you. Arizona did an investigation into ESA vouchers a couple years ago, found fraud and money being misspent. STOs are really hard to know anything about because they are not required to say who they're giving their school tuition organization money to. So these kinds of things tend to increase social and economic stratification. I said earlier that 93% of STOs are used for tuition at religious schools. 87% of recipients already went to religious schools, so it's not like it's bringing new people in. They're most often used by families whose kids are already in good schools, in A&B schools. So it also there was just a study that came out last week that shows that it has a negative financial impact on school districts. So an average kid who uses an ESA or an STO really costs the state about $10,000. the per pupil spending for a kid in a district school is around 6,000, give or take, depending on how you're cutting the numbers.
So, how do we get to this place? We're a democracy, right? The only things that happen in this country are the things that we vote for. What happens is what we want to happen, right? That's kind of the premise of our entire society. Well, the way you get people to do something is to tell them what they need to know in order to go along with something. So you've heard Sharon talk a little bit about these retermings that they've used. Instead of calling it, just the public school, it's the government school. You saw that New York Times cover from just over the weekend. And there's a quote on a different, one of the other pages in that same story that says, by a teacher here in Arizona who says, while that strike was going on, they called us communists, they called us socialists, they called us Marxists. I'm a Republican. So this process of getting us, and I know that we've shared some really scary information, and maybe you're sitting here as a public school graduate going like, oh my God, I was cheated, I'm terrible. And that is not true at all, but it has been the goal. So this movement has sabotaged the public education system by cutting its resources, decertifying its professionals, denigrating the entire institution. And then when the schools are, beat down and starving and struggling, then this movement points and says, look how terrible you are. You're doing a terrible job. I think of it as if you were setting up a race, right? Like a marathon. And you gave, brand new Nikes to one person, and then you gave dollar store flip-flops to the other. And you said, race. And then the one in the Nikes wins, and the one in the flip-flops falls, and then you come over with the person with the flip-flops and say, what a failure you are. You deserve nothing. This has basically been the conceptual process that we have imposed on our public education system, calling them dead ends, calling them government schools, referring to teachers as brainwashers and socialists. So the impetus behind many people trying to push students and funding into private education, into religious education, is to separate out the good ones from the riffraff. So the riffraff get to stay in the public schools with their flip-flops, and the good ones get every hand up to be together and not exposed to these terrible ideas and these terrible families. And then you relabel that alternative. You don't talk about the fact that the person who won in the nice Nikes got more help, more resources, more assistance, more support, more encouragement. You just say that they're better. Well, clearly these are smarter, these are better. Of course we should support them. Why are we gonna waste our money, throw away our money on the losers over here? And so you start using really complementary terms in contrast to all those negative terms. So this is about choice. We're Americans. We want the freedom to make our choices. We want opportunity. Why are you going to deny someone the opportunity to go to a better school? Competition makes us all better. But last time I checked, competition does one thing. It produces a winner and a lot of people who aren't winners. But is that the way to build a society? As we've been going through this process of Save Our Schools Arizona, one of our earliest and most fervent supporters and encouragers has been the business community, specifically fields like technology, science, healthcare, engineering, because these companies want to hire people and they don't like spending exorbitant amount of money to go to other countries to recruit people to come and work in Arizona. They want to be able to hire people who live here. And then appeal to the emotions. We all like to think that we're extremely rational human beings. I only make decisions once I know all the facts. But really, we are emotional animals. And at the end of the day, and the school privatization, the school choice movement knows this, we make decisions that make us feel good. So when you see a child with, a learning disability excelling in a private school environment, or when you hear about uplifting poor families and sending them to better schools, that makes you feel good. And then, of course, you think, yeah, that's a good idea. We should do more of that. But then you start to hear these numbers, that 75% of vouchers are used by wealthy families, that only 4% of ESA vouchers are used by families at the poverty level, 4%. You learn that these schools that are accepting most of these STO and ESA vouchers are demographically heterogeneous, meaning there is one race in those classrooms, maybe one or two, and they're at the lighter end of the spectrum. And this information, you put it out in little bites, right? First, it's the special needs kids, then it's the military kids, little by little, the incrementalism that Sharon was talking about. And you do it at the right time. So you saw this decades progression. And these folks have the time, they have the resources, and they have the patience to wait until moods are right, to invest their money into creating the right government structure that they want, to getting the right people elected. And then when that situation, in rhetoric studies, we call this kairos, it's like the golden moment. We've got the right person in the governor's office, we've got the right person running the Senate, we've got the right person running the House. This is the year for the bill. Except they weren't counting on us. So part of the idea, as we understood it, was you're all interested in social justice. Maybe there's something unjust going on out there that you want to do a little bit of dismantling of, or you want to shake things up a little bit and get some attention and get people to think about this. We had, when the 6 of us who formed Save Our Schools Arizona met, because we didn't know each other, we just met at these hearings, and kind of, you see these faces and you go like, oh, hi again, what's your name? And when this bill passed, despite all this public opposition, we looked at each other and said, what now? We just go home, like the little guy lost, the powerful guy won, like age-old story, goodbye. And one of us, of the 6 original people, said, no, this is Arizona, we can do a referendum. All we have to do is collect some signatures. And we're like, oh yeah, okay, sure, yeah, signatures are good, I can do that. We had no idea what we were getting into. But we knew how to use Facebook, right? We knew how to use Twitter and Instagram and everything else. We knew how to knock on doors. We knew how to go stand in front of the baseball, Diamondbacks stadium. And we just said, there are people like us. There are people out there who care about this issue, who showed up to the Capitol with us. So we knew that there was an audience. We knew there was an appetite for something better. Because here in Arizona, I think, we see charter schools everywhere, right? There's private schools a lot. But actually the statistic is that 95% of Arizona families of kids are in public schools, even though we have all these options, which means we as a people are still choosing these schools that we are systematically robbing from. So that means to us, that told us that as long as people know this situation, they'll be interested in fixing it, but they need to know it. So we knew that we had an audience if we could just get our message to them. And because we're just regular people, we all have day jobs, we all have families, we all have other things going on. This endeavor has done nothing but cost us money, right? Cost us money, cost us time, cost us everything you can think of. But that makes us more trustworthy, right? Because we're in it for real. We're not getting anything out of this. we were not going to go and open a public school or something, right? And so kind of developing an identity that is the true reason that you're into this and communicating that. Because people want to go with people they can trust, with people that they see some sincerity in. And then when we were trying to figure out, well, what are we about? We're against these voucher expansions, we're against Prop 305, what are we for? And we came up with this message of, at the end of the day, we're just trying to protect public education. I like to think of it as, we have a wounded patient, the public education system, who's bleeding out, literally bleeding funds, bleeding out. Prop 305 going down stops the bleed. That's all it does, is stop the bleed. And then we need to heal the patient. And that's the next step. We need to protect public education from these incessant attacks. And then once it's safe, work together to start to undo some of this harm, to get funds back into it, to give some integrity back to the profession of teaching, to give kids a sense that they deserve to have recess and field trips and a working bus and a trained teacher at the head of the classroom. And we don't ever vary. Don't ever get away from your key message. There have been so many organizations, good and bad, pulling at us. Come and do this with us, or come and work on this other project with us. But you have to stay focused, right, on your main mission. Because in our case, we were the only ones focusing on it at the time. So many, even other educational organizations, were jaded. They were tired after this constant kind of incremental attack. It was like, yeah, one more loss, one more hit. And again, we had kind of the luck of ignorance. We were like, no, damn it. We're gonna fight back. And so these are some of the messages, and no matter what show we go on, no matter what reporter we talk to, no matter what we post on social media, it never varies from this, because the human mind is persuaded by repetition. It is not persuaded by logic. It is not persuaded by, I don't know, jingles or pretty pictures. That catches our attention. But for information to sink in, our minds require repetition. So, that's it. Thank you.
We wanted to leave time for questions.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Questions from you all who've been listening to this, for the beneficiaries or the not beneficiaries of the changes that they've been talking about. Yeah.
Just one quick question for clarification. You said that 95% of the students in Arizona go to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Does it count also the charter schools?
We're including charter schools,
okay,
yes. So if you split them up, then it's about 81% are in traditional public schools,
Okay.
and then 14-ish or so percent are in charter schools, which are publicly funded here in Arizona. Which means, we've heard this expression of like the 1% of the country that has all the wealth. It is, in Arizona, when it comes to education, it's literally the 5%. 5% of families choose private education, and yet you can see that our public schools have a $1 billion deficit in our budget, and the private schools have accrued $1 billion in additional funds.
Question for you. You talk about needing to get some signatures, being outside the baseball stadium or maybe outside of a grocery store. Can you give us a little thicker description of how many signatures you needed, how many you collected, and how did you decide who to talk to and how to mobilize so many people?
So state law tells you exactly how many signatures you need to stop a law, which is what we did, because the governor had signed it, it was supposed to kick in, us collecting signatures stopped it. And it's a percentage of how many people are registered to vote, because these can't just be like any signature, it has to be voter signatures. So the requirement for us to stop that law was 75,321.
Valid signatures.
Valid voter signatures from all over the state, every county, not like just Phoenix.
I was going to say, as you're doing this, could you also mention the way the legislature has now made it much more difficult to have petitions because they have all these picky rules now that if you let if your name, like my name is Nancy, if my Y goes below the line, it's out.
Yeah.
I think my favorite example of strict compliance, it's called, and so the legislature, even though we have a constitutional right to refer bad legislation, the people of Arizona do, to refer bad legislation like Save Our Schools did, or to try to put an initiative on the ballot like the Invest for Ed Red Fred people did this summer that was kicked off. So for ours, we knew we had to get about double because there are many, many reasons why a signature can be thrown off. And my favorite example is they said, look, the people who sued us, which was the Koch brothers, through the Americans for Prosperity and the Goldwater Institute, they said, look, the person who notarized this document, because you get your signatures, there are 15 signatures per page, and then the person who gathers the signatures has to go to a notary and say, yes, I gathered all these signatures, they notarize it. So my name is Sharon J. Kirsch. If I sign, and I'm a notary, if I sign Sharon Kirsch, didn't have my middle initial, they said, you know what, all those signatures should be thrown out. They said, Save Our Schools has this problem that their notaries are not signing properly in their stamp, their notary stamp, it doesn't match. If it doesn't match, all those signatures, all those notaries should be thrown out. And that would have been a lot of signatures for us. Luckily, the judge didn't see it that way in that case. But there are a lot of strict compliance rules in place that make it very, very difficult for the citizens of our state to get referendums and initiatives on the ballot.
So that being said, though, it is possible. So we knew that, we needed at least 75,000 plus valid signatures. We had 90 days to do this. This was during June, July, and August. May, June, and July. And if you've ever been out and about, where are people hanging out, like asking you to sign their petition? Outside, right? Outside of DVAC Stadium, at the park, at a water park, on the street corner, outside of restaurants, outside of coffee shops, because these are all private businesses, right? You can't just hang out in there and conduct politics. So we had less than 90 days to collect 75,000 valid signatures. There were 6 of us who started. We could use Facebook, right? So we started everyone that we knew, every friend, every family, everyone who we had seen at the Capitol. We started exchanging information. We went to other organizations that already existed who may not even have been our topic. They weren't education organizations, but they were interested in some other facet of social justice. So we went to childcare organizations. We went to, teacher groups. We went to daycare centers. We went to any organization that had a mission of trying to improve society in a more just way. We went to them and said, can we bring a petition to your meeting? You're having a luncheon, can we come? Or can we come and talk? We were shameless about just knocking on doors, going to anyone, and many people said no. We asked organizations to have us in, and they said, well, that's not really our thing, or maybe they need the governor to grant them something soon, so they didn't want to be seen as, kind of on the wrong side of something. People turned us down. We just picked up and asked the next person.
But a lot of people who circulated petitions for us were from every political party.
Yeah.
We even had people whose kids went to private schools circulating petitions for us because they believe in the importance of public education and don't expect a handout from the state to send their kids to private school. So we found again and again and again that the vast majority of people in our state support public education and want it to be protected and well-funded.
We used every free tool available to us. Like I said, time, your time is worth money, especially if you're not at work or not doing something else. But because we felt like this was important enough, and we kind of shared just a tiny bit of these statistics and this idea with people, and just said, you know, do you have 15 members in your family? If so, just get them to sign this. And they did, and then we would hunt them down and take it back, and for those 86 days or whatever it was, a couple hundred of us probably worked 18 hours a day, every single day, in the summer heat. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it was validating every time you would tell someone, hey, there's this law that would take money out of our public schools and give it to private schools. Most people go, what? That's allowed? No, we shouldn't be doing more of that. And that's enough then to say, yeah, I agree, so please sign this, and do you have 2 friends who you think agree with you? Is there another question?
Yeah, what's the relationship between Save Our Schools and Invest in Ed? If that can be addressed briefly.
Yeah, no, it can. In fact, I had slides on this. I think, you know, Save Our Schools has been really focused on vouchers. Like, that's our thing. We've stayed in our lane. Of course, we supported, we participated in all the Invest for Ed thing, but when everybody was at the Capitol, we were passing out stuff on No on Prop 305. Trying to make sure people understood what vouchers are and why, if you want to protect public schools, you would choose to vote no.
So if you don't know what Invest in Ed is, it was a separate proposition initiative, a whole different signature collection effort so we were trying to stop the bleed. They were trying to do an additional income tax on the highest earners, so the most affluent incomes, to put new money into schools.
Over 250.
250,000 and above would have gotten a slight tax increase, and then that increase would have gone into public education. They gathered more than enough signatures. They were going to be on the ballot. They went through every step, and then the Arizona Supreme Court, the same one that said that we were okay, said that there was a flaw in their legalese, basically, in the way that they wrote this idea. And they kicked it off the ballot. And so that's what Invest in Ed is, if you don't know what that question was about.
Just one other comment in terms of the ideology behind this. I think there's a big motivation with privatization of everything is to get away from entitlement. So people are no longer entitled to an education. They might get a little bit of help. And right now they're saying they want to raise it, but the long run goal is to reduce state expenditures and put the burden for obtaining education and paying for education, I think, off on to the individual, which some individuals will be able to do that with ease, but a lot of people won't.
Yeah. There's a really interesting kind of intellectual disconnect when we think about the fact that these are tax dollars put on a card or in a private account, and then the state literally looks away and says, we just trust you to hopefully use this for school stuff. Can you imagine if as a state, as a government, we did this with like food stamps? If we just said, okay, here's $200, we don't care what you do with it. If you know anything about food assistance benefits, it is extremely tightly controlled. You can only buy certain things. It's a very limited list. There are a ton of checks in between to make sure that someone isn't, buying a bottle of wine with their food stamp. And yet we'll load $30,000 onto a school voucher and say, okay, we hope you use it in the right place.
For now. That's what they'll do now. Mm-hmm. Until they get it, and then they won't want to pay it.
I think there was a question over there. Did you have a question?
I did. So I'm on your website right now, and there's an option to donate, and it says, your matching donations and your contributions, thank you. I was just wondering is it one big pot that the contributions are going to, and then people decide, oh, we're gonna put it towards marketing, oh, we're gonna, compensate our volunteers, or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are entirely donation-based. Our average donation is, I think it's up to $50. So it is literally just regular people who say, I care about this. So here's $100, you know. And yes, you know, we kind of have this pot, and we have car stickers. You'll start to notice, hopefully, lots of yellow car stickers that say no Prop 305. There they are in the back. Flyers. We do have some volunteers who basically, like, some of them do this as a full-time job, and so we, you know, pay for their gas, so at least they can keep volunteering for us. You know, they get a stipend. And yeah, that's exactly what we do with every donation. Kind of goes to the flyers, the stickers, the yard signs, the thing that allows us to keep up and running. And every single, it's like, you know, it's like being broke college kids. Like every single month we're like, what do we have? What can we afford? Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? And we just cobble it together and keep it going. And that is the reality of nonprofit work, of social justice work so many times. And that's why it's so important to find the people who believe in it and connect and you know, connect with people who then are billionaires and believe in what you're doing and hopefully get that kind of support going.
We haven't got that yet.
No, we haven't met those people yet, but if you know them.
So two last questions before we wrap up. One is, we're under 2 months to the voting day, election day, November 6th, for anyone who missed that at the beginning. So what do you need from people who want to get involved? How can people get more involved in this work? And number two, on November 7th, what do you all do? Is this going to morph into, what are the next steps, if any?
That's a good question. So Save Our Schools Arizona PAC is wholly focused on the No on Prop 305 campaign. And we don't have money to do TV ads and things like that. We did get money for a couple billboards, which we're really, really excited about. But really what we need from people and want from people is just for you, if you care about this, if you care about our public schools and you want to protect public education, help people understand why they might want to vote no on Prop 305. It's really word of mouth. Last weekend we had canvases all over the state. We went knocking on doors. Sometimes we sit at coffee shops and just talk with people. So if anybody is interested in getting involved in any of those little or big ways, we love to have people. We're all volunteers. So anything people want to do, you can just stop by and see us, and we would be happy to have you.
As for the question of what we do the day after Election Day, so again, we said we need to stop that bleed, but we also, for me, I'm the communications person, I want to send that message. I want to send a global message that the very state that started this whole privatization experiment just rejected it with, you know, I want 75% or above no vote on this. Because that says something, right? That says that voters don't want this. And so every person who got elected, whether they agree or not, they know that if they're gonna go against the voters, we're now paying attention. Because this incrementalism that Sharon talked about, this 30-year march of little by little by little, these folks don't take one hit and take their ball and go home. So Prop 305 going down in flames in November is going to slow them down. They're going to recalibrate. And right now I am making bets with anyone who wants that they will be back. If we re-elect the same people who did this, they will be back with an identical bill in January if we put those people back in power. And so our goal, in addition to no Prop 305, is to elect people from whatever party. We are not party specific, Democrat, Republican, whatever, who are going to protect public education. They're never going to vote to agree with bills like this to begin with. They're never even going to let them get to the governor's desk. Because I don't want to collect those signatures again. I want a summer off. And then we're just going to keep at it, because we ended up here through long, patient work. We're going to have to undo it through repeated, patient work.
So I think we'll have our guests meet us outside for a few minutes of more informal talk. I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Professor Marie Provine, who designed, envisioned, launched this series, Seeking Justice in Arizona. So thank you, Marie, for being here with us today. Our next next stop on this Seeking Justice journey is going to be Thursday, October 4th, right here, when we have Annabelle Maldonado from the Demand to Learn campaign, underwritten, sponsored by the ACLU here in Arizona. So fighting the school prison pipeline. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all there. And thanks again to Professor Greg for her work and our guests, John and Sharon. Thank you.